Remove that ugly shed or face legal consequences. That's what our HOA president screamed at my wife over what should have been a simple conversation about a garden storage building. Karen, yes, that kind of Karen, thought she could bully anyone in our neighborhood with her clipboard and threats. She strutted around like she owned the place, convinced her little title gave her real power. But she had no idea who she was dealing with. My wife, Anna, carries a quiet strength that doesn't announce itself. And she has the kind of authority that doesn't need shouting, just a signature, and entire operations can come to a halt. What started as a petty dispute over a wooden shed turned into the most satisfying, jaw-dropping reversal I've ever witnessed. Watching that woman go from, "I run this neighborhood," to complete panic mode was nothing short of priceless. The whole thing still gives me chills when I think about it. Let me set the scene. It was one of those perfect Saturday mornings in our quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind where the air feels soft, the birds are loud, and you actually want to stay home instead of running errands. Anna was sitting at our kitchen table with her coffee, typing away on her laptop. To the casual observer, she might have looked like any other wife catching up on emails or maybe shopping online. But I knew better. Those weren't casual messages she was reading. They were work briefings from her job with the federal government. And that focused look in her eyes, the slight narrowing, the way her fingers paused between keystrokes, that was the same expression she got when she was analyzing evidence or planning her next move in a high-stakes case. I was outside, tinkering with our old shed, trying to fix a loose board that had been bothering me for weeks. It wasn't much to look at, just a basic wooden structure where we kept the lawn mower, garden tools, and some boxes from when we first moved in 3 years ago. But this shed meant more to Anna than most people would understand. One night, during a quiet conversation over wine, she told me something I've never forgotten. "You know," she said, gazing out the kitchen window toward the shed, "this isn't just storage for us. Back when I was doing field work, I kept important equipment here. But it's also where I stored our wedding photos when we first moved in. It's like the bridge between my two worlds, justice and love." I smiled at the poetry of it, joking that it was deep for a Saturday morning. She laughed and said something about how not all battles need gunfire. Sometimes, all you need is knowing what you're fighting for. I didn't realize how true that would become. We were just enjoying our peaceful weekend, completely unaware that our quiet morning was about to be shattered by the most epic Karen encounter of our lives. The doorbell rang at exactly 10:30 a.m., and I swear, the sound itself felt more aggressive than usual. Anna and I exchanged glances. Neither of us was expecting anyone, and our friends usually texted first. When I opened the door, I was greeted by a woman who looked like she'd stepped straight out of a meme. Miranda Foster stood there in a navy blue blazer that screamed, "I demand to speak to your manager," clutching a clipboard like it was a weapon. Her blonde bob was so perfectly styled it looked like it could survive a hurricane, and her oversized glasses reflected the morning sun in a way that made her seem like she was plotting world domination. "Good morning," she announced with the kind of authority usually reserved for generals or Supreme Court justices. "I'm Miranda Foster, HOA president. We need to address your unauthorized structure." And then, no joke, she pointed at our humble little shed like it was a nuclear hazard. The disgust in her voice when she said unauthorized structure made it sound like we'd built a toxic waste facility in our backyard instead of storing a lawnmower in a wooden box. What happened next was like watching a masterclass in Karen behavior. Miranda pulled out a measuring tape and started inspecting every inch of our shed, taking notes on her clipboard with the intensity of a crime scene investigator. She muttered things like, "definitely non-compliant," and "clear violation of aesthetic standards," while snapping photos from every angle. At one point, she actually got down on her knees to take what I can only describe as artistic low-angle shots of our shed, like she was documenting evidence for a federal case. Then came the regulations. Oh, boy, the regulations. Miranda started reading from her clipboard, like she was reciting scripture. According to HOA Bylaw 15.3, Section B, Subsection 4, she began, "All outdoor structures must conform to community aesthetic guidelines and receive prior approval from the Architectural Review Committee." She said it with such robotic precision, I half expected her to have practiced it in front of a mirror. "I'd hate for this to escalate," she continued, her voice dripping with fake concern. "But community standards exist for a reason. Some people think rules don't apply to them." Anna had been quietly observing this whole performance from our front porch, and I could see her studying Miranda, with what I now recognize as her professional assessment mode. When Miranda finished her regulatory lecture, Anna stepped forward with a calmness that should have been Miranda's first warning sign. "Interesting approach to neighborhood rules," Anna said, her voice perfectly pleasant, but with an undertone that made my spine tingle. "What exactly happens if we need more time to fix things properly?" Miranda's eyes lit up like she'd been waiting for this question her entire HOA presidency. "Well, there are fines, of course. Legal action possibilities. I have relationships with city officials, you understand? Some people learn the hard way that I don't make empty threats." The smugness in her voice was so thick you could have cut it with a knife. She clearly thought she was dealing with typical homeowners who would cower at the first mention of legal consequences. But Anna just smiled slightly and gave me one of those looks I'd learned to recognize over our 5 years of marriage. It was the look that said, "Work mode activated." And it usually meant someone was about to have a very bad day. Miranda, bless her oblivious little heart, had absolutely no idea what she'd just walked into. That's when Anna dropped the first bombshell, though it seemed innocent enough at the time. "I think you should double-check the property boundaries in the HOA documents," she suggested, her tone so helpful and sweet that Miranda's confident expression faltered for just a second. I ran inside to grab our house records, curious about what Anna was getting at. When I found the original property survey, my jaw literally dropped. "Actually," I called out to Miranda, "this section with the shed was grandfathered in before the HOA even existed." The color drained from Miranda's face so fast, I thought she might faint right there on our driveway. "That's impossible," she sputtered, her carefully controlled authority cracking like a dam under pressure. "I've been managing this community for 5 years. But Anna just stood there with that mysterious smile, completely unfazed by Miranda's mounting panic. "Sometimes the oldest structures have the most interesting histories," Anna said softly. And something about the way she said it made me realize there were layers to this conversation I wasn't understanding yet. Miranda spent the next 10 minutes frantically checking her own paperwork, muttering under her breath and shooting increasingly desperate glances at our shed. Finally, she seemed to pull herself together, straightening her blazer and lifting her chin with renewed determination. "This isn't over," she declared, trying to resurrect her earlier authority. "Grandfathered or not, there are still community standards to maintain. You have 48 hours to address the aesthetic concerns, or you'll be hearing from my legal team." As Miranda marched back to her pristine white SUV, taking more photos along the way, our elderly neighbor Mr. Williams looked up from watering his garden and shook his head. "Son," he called over, "that woman's been a pain since day one. Good luck with this one." His voice carried the weariness of someone who'd been dealing with Miranda's antics for far too long. But here's where things got interesting, and this was the moment I should have realized my wife was playing a completely different game than the rest of us. After Miranda drove away, Anna pulled out her phone and started taking photos. Not of our shed, but of Miranda's license plate on the back of her SUV. When I asked what she was doing, Anna looked at me with those intelligent eyes that had first drawn me to her 7 years ago. "Sometimes the oldest structures have the most interesting histories," she repeated, glancing between our shed and Miranda's retreating vehicle. Then she added something that sent chills down my spine. "But what if the real question isn't about the shed at all?" Those 48 hours that Miranda gave us turned into the most educational 2 days of my life, though not for the reasons you might expect. I immediately started planning some quick cosmetic fixes to the shed, maybe a fresh coat of paint, some new trim, anything to avoid more drama with our clearly unhinged HOA president. But Anna stopped me before I could even pick up a paintbrush. "Don't change anything major yet," she said with that calm authority that made me pause mid-stride. "Trust me on this." The way she said it wasn't a request. It was the voice of someone who knew exactly what she was doing, even if I didn't understand the plan yet. While I was stressing about potential legal fees and neighborhood drama, Anna seemed almost relaxed about the whole situation. She spent those 2 days making phone calls in her office with the door closed, typing on her laptop with more intensity than usual, and occasionally disappearing for a few hours without much explanation beyond work stuff. I'd learned early in our relationship not to pry too deeply into her federal job. Some things were classified, and I respected that boundary. But there was something different about her behavior during those 2 days, a focused energy that reminded me of a chess player setting up a complex strategy. Meanwhile, Miranda was busy setting up her own strategy. And let me tell you, this woman did not mess around when it came to wielding her tiny bit of power. On day 2, I found an official letter from the HOA board stuffed in our mailbox, not delivered by mail, mind you, but hand-delivered and taped to the box like some kind of legal summons. The letter demanded that we remove our non-compliant structure within 7 days or face escalating penalties, including fines and potential legal action. The formal language was clearly designed to intimidate, and honestly, it worked on me. I was ready to tear down the shed myself just to avoid the hassle. But Miranda wasn't content with just sending threatening letters. Oh no. This woman went full Karen mode and started making the rounds through our neighborhood like she was running for mayor. I watched from our kitchen window as she went door to door, clipboard in hand, clearly building her case against us. Later that evening, I ran into our neighbor Sandra at the mailbox, and she awkwardly mentioned that Miranda had asked her to sign some kind of petition about maintaining community standards. The way Sandra avoided eye contact told me she'd probably signed it, and I couldn't really blame her. Miranda could be pretty intimidating when she wanted to be. That's when Anna shared something that completely changed my perspective on everything. We were sitting on our back porch that evening, watching the sunset and trying to decompress from the neighborhood drama, when I asked her if she ever got scared in her line of work. She paused for a long moment, staring out at our little shed, before answering in a voice softer than I'd heard in weeks. Sometimes, she admitted. And I knew then, this wasn't just about a shed. This was personal. This was about something much bigger. And Anna wasn't just defending our property. She was defending the bridge between her two worlds. I could hear real vulnerability in her tone. But never when you're backing me up, she said. I was threatened on a case once, about 2 years ago. The whole thing got pretty intense, and for weeks afterward, I jumped at every unexpected sound. But you're the only person who makes me feel completely safe, David. When you're here, I can face anything. The emotion in her voice caught me completely off guard. My wife is one of the strongest, most capable people I've ever met, someone who walks into high-pressure situations with calm precision. Hearing her admit to fear, even just a little, made me realize how much trust she was placing in me during this whole Miranda situation. It also made me wonder what kind of cases she actually worked on, what kind of threats could rattle someone like her. But I knew better than to press for details she couldn't share. Some doors just aren't meant to be opened. The next morning brought Miranda's first real escalation. She called the police. I was getting ready for work when I heard raised voices outside. Looking out the front window, I saw Miranda pacing back and forth on the sidewalk, phone pressed to her ear. Officers, I need you to respond to a situation involving residents who are refusing lawful HOA compliance and being hostile to community leadership, she announced, loud enough that half the neighborhood could hear. And I'm sure that was exactly her intention. Maximum drama, maximum pressure. 20 minutes later, 2 police officers arrived at our door. Officer Rodriguez, a veteran cop who looked like he'd seen every kind of neighborhood dispute imaginable, and Officer Kim, a younger officer who seemed genuinely confused about why they were there. Sir, we got a call about some kind of obstruction issue, Officer Rodriguez said, and I could hear the exhaustion in his voice. The way he muttered again under his breath made me suspect this wasn't his first Miranda-related call. Anna handled the visit with a level of professionalism that should have been my second clue that something much bigger was going on. She calmly showed them our property documents, explained the grandfathered status of the shed, and somehow managed to make Miranda look like the unreasonable party, without ever raising her voice or showing even a hint of hostility. At one point, she quietly handed Officer Rodriguez what looked like a business card. The exchange was so subtle, I almost missed it, but I noticed the officer's eyes flicker with recognition before he nodded slightly and tucked it into his pocket. They left after about 10 minutes, clearly satisfied that we weren't the problem. But Miranda wasn't done. Not even close. That afternoon, she showed up again, this time with reinforcements. A middle-aged man in an ill-fitting suit whom she introduced as her legal advisor. I later found out he was actually her cousin, who worked as a paralegal at some small-town law firm. But Miranda presented him like he was her personal attorney, complete with a business card and a rehearsed speech about our legal exposure if we continued to violate community standards. The whole performance was so over the top, I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing. Here was Miranda staging this elaborate legal theater over a garden shed, treating us like we were international criminals. But Anna listened to every word with perfect seriousness, asking thoughtful questions that seemed to fluster both Miranda and her so-called legal team. When they finally left, promising to pursue all available legal remedies, Anna just watched them go with that same mysterious smile. That evening, Anna finally let me in on what she'd been working on during those quiet phone calls and closed-door laptop sessions. "Should we tell the HOA that you work for the government?" I asked, thinking maybe her federal credentials would make Miranda back down. But Anna shook her head. "If I show my hand too early, we might miss something bigger," she said, her voice taking on that focused tone I'd come to recognize, the one that meant she was closing in on something important. "I've been tracking HOA financial irregularities in this region for months. Miranda's behavior suggests she might be connected to something we've been investigating." I felt my stomach drop. Connected to what? Anna pulled out her laptop and showed me a spreadsheet full of numbers and dates that meant nothing to me. But her next words made everything crystal clear. "Money has a way of leaving trails, David. And people who abuse small amounts of power often hide bigger secrets." She pointed to one line item on the screen. "Look at this. The HOA spent $47,000 on community gate repair last year, but that gate looks exactly the same as when we moved in." Just then, Mr. Williams knocked on our back door. He'd apparently overheard enough of Miranda's recent performances to piece things together, and he had some information that suddenly made Anna's investigation much more interesting. Miranda's nephew just finished that $30,000 garden project she's been bragging about, he said, shaking his head in disgust. "Took him 2 days, used maybe $500 worth of plants. The boy spent more time taking selfies than actually planting anything." Anna's eyes lit up with that intense focus I'd seen when she was deep in a case. "Interesting pattern," she murmured, making notes in a small notebook I'd never seen before. That's when it really hit me. This wasn't just about a shed. This wasn't even just about our HOA president being a control freak. My wife wasn't just defending our property. She was conducting a federal investigation, and Miranda had somehow walked right into the middle of it. The final piece of that day's puzzle came when Miranda made what she thought was a power move, but turned out to be a huge mistake. I watched from our kitchen window as she called someone on her phone, probably thinking she was applying more pressure through her connections. But whatever response she got clearly wasn't what she expected. Even from a distance, I could see her face fall as the person on the other end apparently told her they couldn't help. When she hung up, she looked around the neighborhood like a trapped animal. And for the first time since this whole thing started, Miranda Foster looked genuinely scared. Anna had been watching, too. And when Miranda's call ended, she turned to me with a smile that was both satisfied and almost predatory. "Interesting," she said. "Even her connections are running scared." I stared at my wife, starting to realize I was way out of my depth. "What exactly are you leading up to?" I asked. But Anna just smiled that mysterious smile again. "The question is," she said, never taking her eyes off Miranda's retreating figure, "what happens when someone who thinks they control everything discovers they never had any control at all?" The next phase of our neighborhood drama began when Anna decided to go officially on the offensive. I watched her draft and submit a formal complaint to the city council about Miranda's behavior, laying out everything from the harassment to the questionable financial decisions she'd been making as HOA president. Anna wrote that complaint with the precision of someone who'd done this kind of thing before, citing specific regulations, requesting a formal review of HOA activities. I felt good about our chances. We had documentation, we had proof the shed